It was around this time last year that this channel began warning anyone who was involved in cryptocurrency to get out of those markets quickly because they were going to collapse and collapse in an epic way and not come back. I got a lot of pushback for this. Some had said, Florida Maquis, it wasn't very long ago that you were for it. Well, things had changed dramatically in the cryptocurrency scene, and it had become a haven for speculators and basically con artists. Now, I used an analogy from a TV series called Black Sails. And what was going on in this series, it was set in 17th and 18th century West Indies, the Bahamas. Pirates were trying to establish their own culture in the region, and they were taking gold, accepted currency, and converting it into things like black pearls and rubies and emeralds, and basically trying to hide the wealth. And I counseled everyone, please watch this series, look at what they're doing, and you will see an insight into what's going on in the crypto markets. They also ran a brothel, which is also a fantastic way to launder money and to get information and to leverage people, which is also something that's very common in the crypto markets. Now, what if I told you the guy that's primarily responsible for a big part of the crypto collapse was literally hiding out in the Bahamas, in Nassau, where all of this took place in reality in Black Sails. Now, I know Black Sails is a TV show, that's not reality, but in reality, the pirates did do this back in the 17th, 18th century. The TV show, of course, is a fictionalization, but you get the same idea. But this guy, that's where they found him, in the exact same area. And at that time, about a year ago, when I was streaming live on Twitch in the evenings, we were playing a game called Assassin's Creed Black Flag, also set in Nassau. I just think it's very strange now that they've had to extradite this guy to Palo Alto, California, so he can live with his uber wealthy parents after pretending to be a pirate and a Ponzi scheme artist. FTX founder Bankman-Fried to be released on $250 million bond. The 30-year-old former crypto executive is being released to his parents' home in Palo Alto, California. It's just unbelievable to me that the similarities continue. But once again, that is the basis of psychological operations. When you look at things with a clear mind, sometimes things like this happen. I think the guy really did envision himself some kind of a swashbuckler just in the modern world. But this was the reality, and this is going to continue to be the reality after the first of the year. Here's my prediction. If things hold true, Bitcoin is probably going to lose at least another 30% of its value. It's hovering right around 16,000, 17,000 now. It's probably going to dip below 10. So buying the dip right now, not a good idea. Bitcoin is likely going to crash eventually all the way down to probably around 4,000 or 5,000. Because it only had any real value when dollar speculators got involved in it. So anyway, before I forget though, today, for reference, 22 December, Thursday, 2022, currently 17:41 hours. That is, of course, 5:41 p.m. in the afternoon for those of you in the civilian world. Currently 61.7 degrees, high of 66, low of 52. It's going to get a lot colder though. No wind, no rain, barometer 29.95 inches of mercury. Thank you, everyone who has joined us over at Patreon. We are going to have a brand new video for you guys more than likely by Saturday morning. It's going to be all set up. It's our new direction, so to speak. We're going to be talking about psychological operations in defensive mode. Over the last year, we've talked about identifying others who are in offensive psychological operations mode, how to do it yourself. I think we're going to focus now on how to defend yourself, how to put up walls, how to put up ramparts that don't allow those who try these techniques, try these tactics to have any effect on you. Because the fight you don't have to have is that much more energy you do have for the ones you can't avoid. You see, this was the craziest thing I thought about initially about crypto, is that the target people that they were aiming at to try to get involved in crypto was a group of people who for the last 30 years had been wargaming a scenario where there was no power. There was no internet, without rule of law, the end of the world as we know it, Teotihuacan, we've talked about shit, it's the fan. All of this predicated on what happens when it all goes away. Why crypto guys would have thought, we need to talk to these people. Folks on the right, survivalists, and the gun guys. I'm like, wait a minute, these guys are not going to buy this. They're not going to buy this because it's worthless once the power goes out. You're never, no matter what else you're trying to sell, you're never going to sell survivalists on Bitcoin, but a lot of people bit. And that was really crazy, just for reference. 16,638, this is the graph over the last year. It was as high as 57.73 on December 23rd of last year. Like I said, it's gone from, let's see, how bad is it? Just from that point, 67.24% of its value. But it's likely going to, if you look at what happened this time last year, right after Christmas, it fell off a cliff. It went from 50 all the way down to 35. 35,070 at its lowest point between Christmas and January 22. It recovered somewhat, but then it dropped all the way down to 30, and then down to the 20, and now down to 16. It's with them raising interest rates, people just aren't going to have the money. And there's going to be two logical fallacies that are going to go hand in hand with this. I know I talk about this a lot, but it's what I did. I'm to say it again. I was not Mr. Super Sniper in the military. I was not door kicker, Delta Force, or some Marine Force Recon. I drove a desk. My job was to know the human mind. And logical fallacies and cognitive biases are very, very powerful things when you know how to identify them and use them in a tactical scenario. Wishful thinking, when the desire for something to be true is used in place of or as evidence for the truthfulness of the claim. Wishful thinking, more as a cognitive bias than a logical fallacy, can also cause one to evaluate evidence very differently based on the desired outcome. You see, I had no desire for those who had invested in cryptocurrency to lose everything. I had nothing against those people. They'd never done me any wrong. It was just factually looking at it, not a good bet. And when you add in this other fallacy called the sunk cost fallacy, reasoning that further investment is warranted on the fact that the resources already invested will be lost otherwise, not taking into consideration the overall losses involved in the further investment. Where's it at? I had this stuff out of order. Here it is. Throwing good money after bad. Basically is the idea. Just pouring money down the drain. And it has to do with this. Your subconscious mind does not know the difference between an actual experience or what is actually truthful or good or right that produces an emotion and an emotion that you fabricate by thought alone. So for the guys that were emotionally invested in crypto, the feelings that were derived from it when it went up, 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 were just as real as if what was happening was actually real, when it wasn't, when it was just being speculatively driven up by people taking, ironically, fiat currency, the thing they demonized most in the world. Oh, we hate dollars, we hate them, but give them to us, please. Wait, what? Yeah, take your dollars and dump your dollars into crypto. But I thought fiat currency was worthless. How is it if we put something worthless into something that's worth something, the worth something thing becomes worth more? How many zeros can you add? I mean, adding zero to something doesn't make it more valuable. You see, they can never answer that question, why dumping actual US dollars into it made it worth more. And when people pulled out all their money, now it's not worth anything. It's basic logic, but they had decided to, and I love this picture. Whoever did this graphic, I want to find and send them a thank you note. It's exactly what it is. Their actual real self cut a hole in the back of their head and decided to go down the escapism route. A lot of the crypto guys are also heavy-duty gamers, and they don't involve themselves in the real world. You see, it used to be there was this group of people that thought, you know what? The best thing you can do is buy a car and drive it until it's no longer repairable. I don't care how many times it breaks down. It's always cheaper just to buy the parts and fix it without adding in the cost of this. Okay, you have a car and it's gotten to that point now where things are starting to go wrong regularly and will start to go wrong on a much larger scale. And even if you decide, I'm going to set aside the money. Instead of having a car payment every month, I'm not going to pay interest. I'm going to set aside the money for the repairs. Okay, but are you also going to set aside the money and the time for when the thing breaks down at the worst possible time? The thing you don't know about? Because you can't really tell what the day is going to be with a transmission, for sure. You can tell when it starts to slip a little bit or there's a leak, but you're never going to for sure know. And of course, you're going to want to try to get those last few miles out of it. And then when you're stranded on a regular basis, people don't add those costs in. You see, the idea of having a car payment for a vehicle that isn't going to strand you has a value in and of its own. Not to beat up on the crypto guys too much, but they didn't really tell the entire truth about crypto. That's why a lot of people didn't understand it. By the way, out there, don't feel bad if you didn't understand crypto. Some of the smartest people in the world were like, what? They were like, wait a minute, this is fishy. I mean, we kind of get it. And these weren't dumb people. See, what you're looking at here is a couple guys and a basic Bitcoin mining rig where they used these super fast processors that were basically used for video game graphics to solve incredibly complex problems. And based on whoever solved, every time there was a transaction initiated on the network, they would create this block that was this problem, and whoever solved it first, they got rewarded with a certain amount of Bitcoin. And you're like, okay, this sounds really, really geeky. And it was. It was. What they didn't tell you, and this was the part they didn't tell you, running these rigs costs a ton of money in electricity and generates a shit ton of heat. You could heat a house with a rig this big. No lie. If you stationed it in a good place, you could heat a house. Now, in Mongolia and other places around the world, this is what their rigs looked like. This was the real Bitcoin network. And what were they doing? What was their end goal? Their end goal wasn't to create a brand new digital currency. The end goal was US dollars. The end goal was US dollars. In Inner Mongolia, they build as fast as they can some of the cheapest and dirtiest coal plants to generate the electricity to run these things, belching tons and tons of garbage and filth into the air to run these rigs to create the Bitcoin to get the US dollars. Because that's the first thing they do with the Bitcoin. It's what they leverage it in US dollars. And now we're starting to see this Bitcoin miner, Core Scientific, because the price of Bitcoin has gotten so low in US dollars. Core Scientific files for bankruptcy. Publicly traded Bitcoin mining company, CORZ, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in a federal bankruptcy court in the Southern District of Texas early Wednesday morning. Declining Bitcoin price, rising electricity costs needed to power at its data centers, and failure by certain of its hosting customers to honor their payment obligations. Right. Like pirates. Just like pirates. Pirates don't pay their bills. They're all sorts of romantic and fun until it's time to pay the bills. 24 cognitive biases, 24 logical fallacies. And it kind of goes along the same thing with the folks that crutch themselves so heavily on ballistic weapons. You see, you would think, okay, well, if If one weapon is good, two weapons is really good, three weapons is really, really good, following the same logic, all the way up to a T-80 main battle tank and a B-2 bomber, is it the weapons that you can use at the time, or you might be able to find a use for a handheld weapon, handheld weapons for you and your buddies, your local militia? All of this requires maintenance, and none of these weapons last forever. And all of them require what? Ammunition and the ability to use your eyes. All of these weapons are useless to blind men, correct? What about other things, though? Let's say you were in possession of ballistic weapons and you came across a camp where all they had were halberds and swords and shields. But they had food, and you didn't. Well, it should be pretty easy to run them off, right? Well, you see, one of the tactics that's been used by smaller forces when being pursued by larger forces is that they would set up camp temporarily and wait and go out and find larger forces to see if they could get them to pursue them. And then they'd leave delicious food all over the place and run off, leaving everything behind, running as fast as they could. And of course, the arrogant, larger, more powerful force would take advantage of the food left behind, and they would have poisoned it. Of course they would have. 8, 10, 12 hours later, you've got guys sick and dying and stuff coming out both ends. It wouldn't be very hard to waltz back in there, especially these days when you have access to this kind of stuff, and just take those weapons away from them. Just using your head, using your brain. I've got cases of this stuff, this bear spray, because if it comes right down to it, and you've got 4 or 5 guys out there, 6 guys out there, and you're alone in a home, it really don't matter. If they got something they want from you, I don't care how armed you are. If there's 6 or 7 or 8 of them, and they can wait in turns, you can't stay awake forever. You cannot guard all 4 cardinal directions simultaneously. Never stopping to sleep, never stopping to eat, never stopping to use the facilities or bathe. You might get 1 of them, you might get 2 of them, but I tell you what, if you have some of this stuff, and 5 or 6 of them come in, you can level the playing field real fast. Real quick. Especially if you know to keep some of this stuff on hand. And they don't know you have it. You see, this goes to the idea of the most dangerous weapon you can ever face is the one you don't know you're going to face. If you don't know that you're going to face this going up against somebody, and you think you have an advantage, just like the bear. The bear looks at the 180, 200-pound man and thinks, this is going to be a walk in the park. A bear regularly kills things that are 8 times the size of a man. All the time. They take down elk. But he doesn't know about bear spray. And believe me, this stuff is so bad you'll wish you'd been shot. But once you hit a large group of guys like this, armed or not, they aren't shooting anybody for quite some time. And I want you to think about this and think about it honestly. Everything you've been taught at the range, everything you've been taught about handling ballistic weapons requires your ability to use your eyes. If you can take that away from your enemy, you've got them. And this stuff, well, it's real simple. It's just smear it all over your eyes, smear it all over your face. And you'll have a huge tactical advantage over your enemy because they're not going to be, very much doubt guys are going to be walking around with yogurt ready to go. But if you're in your home and you're facing invaders, keep some of this stuff around and keep that bear spray around. You'd be amazed. They might beg you to shoot them. Maybe get a set of these. You see, our mind can play tricks on us and influence our thoughts, emotions, actions. Faulty beliefs are known as cognitive distortions. I'm not against having, see where the picture is, against having weapons. I just know they have their proper place. And I know they're not a panacea. They're not going to solve every problem. You have to have more than a hammer in your toolbox. Especially in the time of the Founding Fathers, back in the time during the time of pirates. You see, big cannons were good for ships because you could have somebody below decks loading and reloading, and you had multiple cannons. Well, as a personal weapon, though, unless you were going to carry a brace of pistols across your chest, or, you're going to get one shot, maybe two, and then it's going to be swords. And so if you were just proficient with ballistic weapons back then, but you didn't know how to handle a sword, you would be dead quick. Because the idea that you could avoid hand-to-hand combat was just ridiculously stupid. They gave you somewhat of an advantage if your enemy didn't have them, muskets and pistols, but, they were also in a very damp, hot environment like the Bahamas. Finding good dry powder, I'll bet, was very, very difficult. That those weapons were not nearly as effective as in a colder, drier environment like the Midwest in the winter. So, anyway, I will leave that there, but it is just beyond. You couldn't have written it any better. I know the analogy that I made with black sails wasn't perfect. It was somewhat clumsy, but it was basically the same idea. There was a bunch of people who were living on the edge of society that wanted to transact value in a different way with different sets of values. And Bitcoin and black pearls were basically the same thing. This character, and I know I'm kind of rambling here at 22 minutes, but this character, if you watch season 1, the first couple of episodes, when she gets a hold of these black pearls that she's going to be trading for some information on a map, she's got a huge bag of them. And they bring in a guy who was, one of those guys that declares the values of things. They used to have the TV show where the people would bring in the antique or the piece of art, and they got an appraiser. She brought in an appraiser. And she made him appraise each pearl to make sure that she had the equivalent value of what she wanted. Which I thought was an interesting thing to add in. That, because he sat down, he appraised one, said, well, yep, these are pretty good. This is what this amount is worth. And she said, what about this one? What about this one? And she made him appraise each one because she wanted to get her money's worth, because he was going to take a portion for doing it. So, anyway, and that Bankman-Fried was hiding out literally where that was set, in Nassau in the Bahamas, I think is just too big of a coincidence. So, anyway, I will leave it there, but psychological operations, guys. Those of you who've joined us at Patreon, you know what I'm talking about. Like I said, Saturday, more than likely, for sure, we're going to have a brand new defensive PSYOPs video up. Would love to have you there. $1 per month, even less if you sign up for an entire year. Fully refundable. Partnering with Vimeo, we can take the gloves off. God bless. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.